Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. We're here in Encinitas, California, with an amazing carpenter and builder, and really a really deep spiritual cat, Jen Mattson. Welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, there's two things. I want to just throw out these two words here. The first one is completion. It's something I struggle with, and what I mean by that is like a project where I can go really strong for 3/4 of the way, maybe even 80% of the way, and do exemplary work. And then for some reason, it's relationships, projects, doesn't matter, interviews, and for some reason, I can get across the finish line, but it's painful. Sometimes I don't. And I just wanted you to talk about how you learned to complete things in your life. And that can go across any line. It doesn't have to be necessarily cabinet building.
Well, my first thought would be cabinet building.
Yeah, it's fine.
Because when you're talking about completion, you don't really have a choice. So I always tried to get done on time, and you're always being followed by other contractors like painters or tile men, you know, so they're on the calendar, so you know when they're coming, so you know when you have to get out, you know, you have to be done with your phase. When it comes to things that are my personal project, I usually like building toy trucks for my kids or something, or for my grandchildren. I will be motivated to complete that because I want to be able to give it to them, you know. And
did you find that, like, going back to even your degrees in art, did you always have were you always able to complete things, or I'm just talking about cultivating that ability to finish a job?
That's a good question, because in graduate school, I was admitted to the school that I got my BA from,
UC Davis?
the BFA, which was California College of Arts and Crafts.
Mm.
But in the meanwhile, I had applied to Berkeley. So I was accepted at Berkeley, and then I dropped out of the Arts and Crafts MFA program. But with Berkeley, I didn't really have a chance to complete it because some of the key professors didn't like my work, and you had to pass a review in order to have units counting towards your degree.
Mm.
So after failing that review a couple times, a friend of mine who I knew socially and also as a faculty member at Arts and Crafts was teaching at Davis, and he invited me to apply to UC Davis. So at that point, maybe half or 2/3 of the way through, my wife finished. How did it go? I'm thinking back 60 years.
It's a big...
Yeah. So anyway.
Can I ask you, though, about the idea of completion with these professors were not going to allow you to complete because they didn't like your work?
No, I could see it was on a dead end there. So,
right.
But what happened is I finished, as long as Artie was in school, I was going to just stay in school, you know. So I completed my MA at UC Davis before she was done with her degree. So she graduated about 5 months after I did, and then we moved down here. So, but as far as completion, I'm usually pretty determined to finish what I start, you know.
The other thing is, like, I remember talking to John McLaughlin, and he said, you know, it's about the effort and the focus that you put into something. It could be peeling potatoes or sweeping the streets. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about was focus, like how you developed laser, especially you can go to cabinet making if you want, but it's so easy in this time, even myself, just being scattered, being distracted constantly. And obviously, there's people that would say, well, there's meditative practices or spiritual practices you can use to focus, but how did you learn to cultivate focus? Because the stuff that the kind of craftsmanship that you have requires a lot of focus. And I can tell you right now, my patience and frustration would get the better of me. And I just want you to talk about how you cultivated focus.
Well, I've always worked on my own. I've worked by myself, and I've learned if I allow myself to be distracted by something on the radio or
Right.
whatever, when I'm working, I realize that I'm just prolonging the job. I'm just prolonging the completion. So,
but you always had
losing focus is wasting time, basically. So, because you're not getting done what you had in mind.
But you never, you never were shaken, your inner faith that you could ever complete a job. That's part of the issue with me, is that I'll sometimes break down because it'd be sort of a self-defeating kind of thing. But you've never been in a situation, even early in your career, where you felt overwhelmed because you weren't sure if you could do the job.
I felt that way, but I didn't let that stop me.
Is there an example you can give? I know we're going back.
Well, when I lived in Central California, we were having a hard time financially, so I took on
Yeah.
I took on 3 jobs at once, and I couldn't make any of them happy.
Wow.
I did finally finish all of them, but it was an unpleasant experience. I would work till 11 o'clock at night. And,
That's fine.
anyway.
And the idea is not, maybe the lesson there is just don't take on more than you can.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Right. So
It's kind of like playing like multiple string instruments and being mediocre at all of them, as opposed to just honing in on one and being really good at it.
Yeah.
The one thing I forgot to ask you, I mean, you were really hip musically. Jared said that you were playing Bird, Charlie Parker for them in the crib. Is that true?
Well, actually, it was Ornette Coleman.
I'm sorry. So talk about how did you learn to, you love jazz.
Yeah, I do.
Talk about it. I mean, is it the self-expression? That's what jazz is self-expression.
My parents always had classical music around, and they went to concerts and so on. But I was constantly exposed to classical music. But of course, I like the top 40, the hit parade or whatever.
Sure.
But when I was 22 or 23, I started listening to classical music on a regular basis. And I knew Miles and Coltrane. I'd heard them enough to be impressed. It was in an academic setting. I mean, you're going to get exposed to those things. But they just hooked me, So ever since, I've kind of split my push buttons on the radio. There's only 2 that I push. One is the classical station, and the other one is the jazz station. It's because some classical